morning sun stretched across the prairie like golden honey over biscuits, and Samuel Morrison had been riding fence line for near 3 hours when he heard it. A voice so desperate it cut right through the meadowlark songs and the gentle whisper of wind through buffalo grass, "Save me." The words carried on that autumn breeze, and Samuel pulled his mare Bonnie to a halt, squinting across the rolling landscape toward the old cottonwood that had stood sentinel on his property for longer than he had been alive. "Please, I swear I will serve you forever." Samuel was a man of 62 winters who had learned that life dealt cards both fair and cruel, and he had seen enough of both to know when someone truly needed help. He urged Bonnie forward, at an easy pace because Samuel Morrison never rushed toward trouble, but he never turned his back on it either. As he drew closer, the scene became clearer, and his heart grew heavy with understanding. There against that ancient cottonwood stood a young woman, maybe 25 or so, with skin the color of rich coffee, and eyes that held more fear than any person should have to carry. Her dress was torn and stained with what looked like blood. Though Samuel could see she was standing steady enough and breathing regular, a rope bound her to the tree, and Samuel could see the marks on her wrists where she had struggled against whatever bonds had held her before. But what struck him most was not her predicament, but the way she looked at him when their eyes met. Not with the calculating look of someone planning deception, but with the raw honesty of a person who had reached the very bottom of hope and was surprised to find someone there. "Sir, please," she said again, and her voice carried the educated tones of someone who had known better circumstances. "I know how this must look, but I promise you, if you help me now, I will work for you without wages. For as long as you need, I can cook and clean and tend animals, and I will never be a burden. I swear this to you." Samuel dismounted slow and easy, keeping his movements gentle because frightened creatures, human or otherwise, needed to see that you meant no harm. He approached close enough to speak without raising his voice, but far enough away that she would not feel cornered. "What is your name, child?" he asked, though she was clearly a grown woman. Something in her desperate state made him think of the lost calves he had found over the years. "My name is Grace," she replied, and Samuel noticed how she lifted her chin with dignity despite her circumstances. "Grace Whitmore. And I know you have no reason to trust me or help me, but I am asking anyway because I have nowhere else to turn." Samuel pulled his pocket knife and saw how her breath caught until he began cutting the rope that held her to the tree. The hemp fell away and Grace rubbed her wrists but did not step away from the cottonwood, as if she was afraid that moving might break whatever spell of kindness had brought this stranger to her. "Who tied you here?" Samuel asked as he folded his knife and put it away. "3 men, she said, and her voice grew smaller. "They said they would come back for me when they finished their business in town. But I heard them talking, and I know they do not plan to let me go." Samuel nodded because he had lived long enough to know that evil wore many faces and most of them looked ordinary as sunshine. "How long have you been here?" "Since before dawn," she replied. "I have been praying that someone would come along this road, but yours is the first horse I have heard." Samuel looked around at the empty prairie stretching in all directions and realized that this tree sat on land that few people ever crossed. She could have been here for days or weeks without anyone finding her. The fact that he had decided to check this particular fence line today instead of tomorrow felt like something more than coincidence. "You hungry?" he asked. Grace nodded, and Samuel could see that she was not just hungry, but likely had not eaten properly in some time. There was a hollowness in her cheeks and a way she held herself that spoke of someone who had been running on fear and determination instead of food. "Come on." Then he said, gesturing toward Bonnie, "My place is about 2 miles that way, and my housekeeper Martha makes biscuits that could convince angels to give up their harps." For the first time since he had found her, Grace smiled, and Samuel saw that beneath the fear and exhaustion was a woman who had known joy before whatever circumstances had brought her to this tree. "But sir," she said as he helped her up onto Bonnie behind him, "I meant what I said about working for you. I do not have money to pay for help, and I will not take charity." Samuel settled into his saddle and clucked to Bonnie, who began her steady walk toward home. "We will talk about that later," he said. "Right now, let us just get you fed and cleaned up and safe. Martha is going to fuss over you. Something fierce when she sees those cuts on your hands." The ride back to the house passed mostly in silence because Samuel was not one for unnecessary words and Grace seemed lost in her own thoughts. But he could feel some of the tension leaving her body as they put distance between themselves and that cottonwood tree. His ranch house sat in a grove of elm trees that his wife had planted 30 years ago, before the fever took her. It was not fancy, but it was solid and well-maintained with a wide porch and windows that let in plenty of light. Martha came out when she heard Bonnie approaching, and Samuel watched her face change from curiosity to concern to determination as she took in Grace. "Situation, land sakes, child," Martha said, bustling forward. "What has happened to you?" Martha Henderson had been keeping house for Samuel since his wife passed, and she was the kind of woman who could diagnose trouble from 50 yards and have a solution cooking on the stove before you finished explaining the problem. Grace found herself swept into Martha warm care before she could protest, and within an hour she was clean and fed and wearing one of Martha's spare dresses that fit well enough. Samuel watched from his chair on the porch as Martha tended to Grace with the same fierce gentleness. She showed injured birds and orphaned kittens after supper. Grace insisted on helping Martha with the dishes despite Martha protests, and Samuel could see that work was important to Grace's sense of dignity. She moved efficiently around the kitchen, as if she had indeed done such work before, and she asked Martha about the best way to care for the cast iron pan, and whether the chickens preferred their feed scattered or poured. Later, when Martha had gone home to her own small house on the property, Grace found Samuel on the porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. He had been thinking about her situation, and about the men who had tied her to that tree, and about what it meant to have someone ask to serve you forever, Mr. Morrison, she said, settling into the chair Martha had brought out for her. "I want to thank you for what you did today, but I also want you to know that I meant every word I said about working for you." Samuel rocked slowly in his chair, listening to the night sounds of his ranch, the gentle lowing of cattle settling in for the night, and the distant call of a coyote and the rustle of wind through the elms his wife had planted. "You do not owe me anything, Grace," he said finally. "What happened to you today was not your fault, and helping you was not a business transaction." But she persisted, and Samuel could hear the determination in her voice. "Sir, I have been on my own for 2 years now since my father died, and I have learned that there are not many places in this world where a woman like me can find honest work and fair treatment. If you will let me stay and work for you, I will earn my place here every day." Samuel considered this because he was a fair man who understood that dignity often required the ability to contribute something of value. He also knew that Martha had been saying for months that the house was getting too big for her to manage alone, and that his arthritis was making some of the ranch work more difficult. "What kind of work did you do before?" he asked. "I kept house for a family in Denver," she replied. "The Ashfords and I cooked and cleaned and helped care for their children for 3 years until Mr. Ashford business failed and they had to let me go. Before that, I helped my father run a small farm in Kansas until the drought and the bank took it from us." Samuel nodded because those were stories he had heard too many times in recent years. Good people losing everything through no fault of their own and having to start over with nothing but their willingness to work. "Can you handle livestock?" he asked. "I grew up around cattle and horses," she said, "and I am not afraid of hard work or early mornings or getting my hands dirty." Samuel made his decision the way he made most decisions, slowly and after considering all the angles. But once made, his decisions were final. "Martha has been saying she needs help with the house," he said, "and I could use someone who knows cattle to help with the herd. If you want to stay and work, I will pay you fair wages and you can have the small room off the kitchen, but you will not be serving me, Grace, and you will not owe me forever. You will be working for me same as I pay any hired hand, and when you are ready to move on, you will go, with my blessing and a good recommendation." Grace was quiet for so long that Samuel wondered if she had fallen asleep in her chair. But then, he heard a small sound that might have been crying, or might have been relief, or might have been both. "Thank you," she whispered. "You do not know what this means to me." Samuel did know, though, because he remembered what it felt like to be young and alone and facing an uncertain future. He remembered the kindness of strangers who had helped him when he needed it most, and how that kindness had shaped the man he became. The next morning, Grace proved herself worth every penny Samuel planned to pay her. She was up before dawn helping Martha with breakfast, and by the time Samuel came,